Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us here today. I am State Representative Randy Fries. I represent the 94th District, which includes Quincy, Illinois, which of course is where the Illinois Veterans Home Quincy is located. Inefficient, reactive, and chaotic. That's how the IDHS Inspector General described the LaSalle Veterans Home Management's response to a COVID-19 outbreak last fall that resulted in the loss of 36 lives and hundreds of positive COVID cases among both residents and staff. The report also tells us that this disaster should and perhaps could have been prevented. In May of 2019, before COVID, a health and safety audit of the Illinois Veterans Home policies, protocols, and procedures discovered serious problems, including that policies were inconsistent between the homes, that several policies were incomplete or outdated, and very importantly, that while various infection control policies existed, it is not clear how they were integrated into an infection control management program. In 2019, again, before COVID, the director of IDVA was told about the need to develop standardized infection control protocols for all the veterans' homes and to ensure that these policies would be revised annually and communicated accurately to staff. None of this was done. It leaves a person heartbroken. It leaves me frustrated and quite confidently quite angry. On November 10th of last year, I and other Republican members of the House Veterans Affairs Committee sent a letter to Chairperson Kifowit asking to convene an immediate hearing from the Illinois House Veterans Affairs Committee to investigate the spread of COVID-19 and related deaths happening in frightening numbers at the Illinois-run veterans' homes. As was mentioned, it took a month to get a response and a hearing from the House Democrats, and then no meaningful action was taken. This scathing report just reinforces our need for immediate hearings. We have a responsibility to provide oversight, call witnesses, get to the bottom of exactly what happened that caused the sickness and deaths of veterans living under the care of the Pritzker administration in the state of Illinois. We need to gather as much information as possible and take immediate, decisive action to protect the veterans in our care. Today, I am asking our new Speaker and our Governor to work with us to protect the heroes in our care at our state's veterans' homes. Now, if you would please welcome Representative Dan Swanson for further comments. Representative Swanson is the Republican spokesperson for the House Veterans Affairs Committee. Dan?
Thank you, Representative Fries, and thank you for all being here and showing your concern, too, for our lost veterans. As both a veteran of the U.S. Army, the National Guard, and former superintendent of the Henry County Veterans Assistance Commission, caring for our veterans is one of the most important charges we have in our public service. At the press conference we had last week on this topic, I explained to everyone on how December of 2017, following the outbreak of Legionnaire's disease at the Quincy home, I, along with several of my local veterans organization representatives, traveled to and visited the Quincy home and spent a full day talking to their leadership about the mitigating steps and procedures they had executed and they were executing to contain the outbreak there. In those conversations, we noted important lessons learned, including the importance of leadership of the staff being communicated proper standard operating procedures and protocols to minimize future exposure for our veterans and the staff, and then follow those procedures. We all realized adherence to these standards was a matter of life or death. As I mentioned too last Friday, about a month later, then Representative Chaplavia, who became IDVA Director Chaplavia, Representative Stephanie Kifowit, Representative Mike Halpin, and other members of the House Democrat caucus visited Quincy personally and were briefed in the same way I was a month earlier. Chaplavia, as a member of the Illinois House, initiated hearings into the Quincy situation and led the probe as to what went wrong and what was done to remediate the situation. She personally asked probative questions about procedures and protocols, all of which would have provided her a basis of knowledge on this very important topic. Governor, then candidate Pritzker, made her hearings and this issue a central theme of his election campaign against then Governor Rauner. Certainly at the time, he at least understood the potency from a public relations perspective of the problem having lost hometown heroes in our VA homes because proper health protocols were not followed. Beyond the facility level problem, though, which are frankly inexcusable, something was clearly amiss in the governor's office handling of communications from their agency directors during this pandemic. The governor wielded unchecked executive power during this time while Democrats abdicated the legislator's role in checks and balances on executive power. The executive overreach empowered agency directors like never before. Some use that power to help people across Illinois, but to think that some of the handpicked directors of Governor Pritzker use that time to abdicate their responsibilities during a crisis in the height of bureaucratic laziness and neglect. Dozens and dozens of our heroes, many combat veterans, those who had survived battlefield situations, died within the walls of our veterans' home with failure after failure to follow health protocols, costing them their lives. Negligence means failing to do something you should have done. Gross negligence can occur when these acts are wanton. In the case of LaSalle Veterans Home, it wasn't just Director Chaplavia who failed to do her job. Clearly many others failed as well. All the way up and down the chain of command in this executive level agency. Some were separated from state employment without proper exit protocols to document their role in this situation. This may be a great disservice to the families when assigning criminal and civil liabilities. I served with Linda Chaplavia in the Illinois House. I have a great deal of respect for her abilities as a legislator and thank her too for her military service. I was there when she asked questions about public health protocols and procedures as they related to Quincy. To think that she could hear what she heard then and then fail so badly when she wielded the ability to help these veterans is disappointing. We need to initiate hearings now to review these findings and probe deeper into who knew what and where. We owe these hometown heroes and their families nothing less. Thank you. I'll now be followed by Representative David Welter. David?
Thank you, Representative Swanson, for those comments. Good afternoon. I'm State Representative David Welter. I am from Morris. I also represent part of LaSalle County, not where the actual home is, but there are many people that I know that work there and have family there. Those of us that are here today reacted swiftly when we first learned of the outbreak. I joined Representatives Freeze and Swanson back in November, calling for the House Veterans Affairs Committee to hold immediate hearings while the outbreak was still going on, either in person or virtually, to step in and identify how we could help the governor's team act with urgency that this crisis demanded. Crucial weeks passed by with no response to our requests for hearings from the House Democrats, who were too busy at the time trying to figure out whether they were going to keep Mike Madigan as Speaker or not, all while our veterans were suffering. It took until December 8th for the House to hold a hearing, but again, politics got in the way of meaningful action. In the meantime, as we mentioned earlier, The governor did not call in the National Guard to provide support at the LaSalle home until December 10th. Incredibly, Director Chapalavia did not resign until January 11th, more than 10 weeks after the initial outbreak, and 36 veterans had lost their lives. In the aftermath of the Inspector General's report released on Friday, we need to hold hearings to ensure those responsible for this tragic failure are held accountable. We must also begin to restore the public's confidence that we will take any necessary actions to make sure that the multitude of failures that led to this tragedy at the LaSalle home are never repeated. I personally know families that have loved ones there at the LaSalle home, and I've touched on those at the previous committee hearings. During the outbreak, I heard from these families that the communication coming from the home was limited, and some of the testing performed was hampered by delayed results, heightening the anxiety of these families. We later found out that the staff at the home were not using alcohol-based hand sanitizer to kill the coronavirus, as recommended by the World Health Organization, nor were they using proper PPE. There are so many questions this tragedy has brought to light that need answers. This is not a partisan issue. I work with my Democrat colleagues on a regular basis on a wide range of legislation. In fact, I'm criticized many times in conservative circles for how much effort I put into working across the aisle. I'm willing to do whatever I can and whatever we can to work with the governor and Democrats in the Illinois House to protect our veterans. All of us here share that commitment. Let's honor the lives of these veterans that were lost at the LaSalle home by making changes. It's time to schedule a hearing and review the findings of the IG's report. Thank you. Next, I would call up Leader Tom Demmer.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm State Representative Tom Demmer from Dixon, and like Representative Welter, I also represent part of LaSalle County. As we begin to evaluate this tragedy and seek answers to what happened or didn't happen and when, it's important that we review the timeline of events as they unfolded over the past year plus. So first, let's remember that this public health emergency began on March 5th of 2020, after Illinois had its first confirmed case of COVID-19 on January 24th of 2020. During that time, every industry and every person's lives in the state of Illinois were changed dramatically, and 95% of our attention every day was on COVID-19, what to do to protect ourselves and our loved ones from the public health emergency, and what steps we should take to ensure that our communities would be safe. On November 1st, the first case was reported at the LaSalle Veterans Home, 282 days after the state of Illinois saw its first COVID-19 positive case, and after months and months of dramatic and life-altering recommendations had come down from global, national, state, and local health authorities. 1 week later, 60 veterans had tested positive and 43 staff members had tested positive after the beginning of that outbreak 282 days into the COVID-19 circumstance in Illinois. Yet on November 10th, 9 days after that outbreak began, Governor Pritzker said, "Our Veterans Department has really done an outstanding job of keeping the veterans in our veterans' homes safe." A November 12th report from the Illinois Department of Public Health, however, found the real story. The report said, during the first 7 months of the pandemic, the management team and staff did not anticipate and were not prepared for an outbreak. 282 days into a public health emergency that changed everyone's lives, the management and staff at the Veterans Home did not anticipate and was not prepared for an outbreak. That is a clear failure of leadership. That is denial. That is total chaos and confusion. The governor, claiming that the Veterans Affairs had done an outstanding job, covered up the fact that 2 days later, a report found that they were not prepared, and they did not anticipate that circumstance. The report issued by the Inspector General at the Department of Human Services painted a clear picture of negligence. But what it didn't show is why the governor's office and the Department of Public Health failed to act when they knew an outbreak was ongoing, or when they knew that individuals in congregate living facilities were at a much greater risk of negative experience due to COVID-19 exposure and contracting of the virus. We as a legislature must assert our ability to be a check and balance against the executive branch, and we must conduct hearings to understand what happened, who was notified and informed of the outbreak, of the lack of preparations in the Veterans Home during a public health emergency. It's time for us to hold hearings, to invite former Director Chapalavia, to invite current Veterans Affairs Director Price, to invite current Department of Public Health Director Ezike, and any individuals in the governor's office who are responsible for overseeing the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Department of Public Health. The people of Illinois demand answers. We must conduct legislative hearings to provide those answers.